was received funding from Ryukoku University and also Japan Society for the Promotion of Science. And so I move on to the content. We were interested in the impact of COVID-19 on the Russian-speaking and foreign residents in Japan in general. And we chose these two groups. I can explain it, and you can probably imagine this. This is convenient sample. We, both me and my colleague, Professor Carlos, we speak in the native language of those foreign residents. That's why we chose those groups. And I particularly focus, for my research, I focused on the 5 countries that have larger amount of migrants going overseas in general and to Japan in particular. So I focus on Russian, Ukrainians, Belarusians, Uzbeks, Kazakhs, and Kyrgyz. So, and by 2020, there was 16,000 nationals from those countries. And while the majority of them were females, recently we see this large increase of males from Uzbekistan in Japan in particular. And major visa statuses for permanent residents, students, and engineers and specialists in humanities, dependents and spouses of Japanese nationals. On the opposite side, I have total number of Filipinos in Japan, and of course this is one of the largest groups of foreign residents, almost 280,000, and again, majority of those foreign residents are females, and again, majority are permanent residents, long-term residents, technical intern trainees, and spouses of Japanese nationals. There is also refugee status applicants, 254, and I thought it was interesting to actually add them as a part here. And so we conducted in May, August of 2020, we conducted online surveys. So online survey for Filipinos was conducted in Tagalog, and for former Soviet Union Russian-speaking groups, it was conducted in Russian. So there were 84 valid responses for Russian-speaking groups. Nationality, majority of the participants were from Russia, and other countries were less represented. And the age was in those who were in their 40s, 30s, and 20s were the majority, and again, majority concentrated in Tokyo and Kanto area. Permanent residency status, there were 36, again, majority of those who were on permanent residency status. As for Filipinos, we conducted almost simultaneously the studies. Filipinos started a bit earlier in May. There were 322 valid responses. Again, majority as for Russian-speaking groups and for Filipino groups, the majority were females, participants were females. And age, those who were born in 1960s, 1970s, and 1980s, 90s were the majority. So those who are in their really working active labor age. And these respondents were mostly from Kansai area because the original study was aimed for Kansai area. And it was not really possible to do this for Russian-speaking groups because they are dispersed across Japan. So that's why I had to gather as many responses as possible, and they didn't really concentrate on one area. So the majority of participants for Filipinos were also permanent residents. What about the results? What was interesting for us is where participants got information on coronavirus and on services related to COVID in general. So the majority of Russian-speaking and Filipino residents were receiving information from Facebook, Twitter, and other SNS. And it is very interesting to see that Filipinos are watching TV like more than Russian-speaking nationals. And regular like, problems that everybody were facing. Again, it was interesting how Russian-speaking participants were talking about their ability to visit their country, and like the fact that they could not go back home was really upsetting for many of them. It was less prominent for Filipinos. Again, changing working conditions. I assume that the limitation of this online survey is that it was conducted on the Facebook groups, and it might have happened that those people who participated in this survey were less affected and had free time to actually participate in this survey. So, but still 48% of those mentioned changing working conditions. Well, Filipinos mentioned there were more Filipinos talking about changing working conditions, and many of them felt anxious about their health, family, and the future. Both groups missed their friends and families back home, and like really were talking about how it will be possible to go back home. And one of the questions that we asked, like whether it is difficult to get accurate information, and a lot of people were complaining that they were confused about mixed messages that were like circulating, especially in the beginning of the pandemic. And 11% of Russian-speaking and 24% of Filipinos mentioned that they cannot sustain their family's daily needs. And we also were interested in how COVID affected people's employment situation, and 63% of Filipinos and 44% of Russian-speaking participants mentioned that their income decreased, and some of them were dismissed from work. 23% again, Filipinos were more affected than Russian-speaking participants. But some mentioned also that they were busier at work compared to the time when, before COVID. And some of them had to do telework, and only a very small number of people mentioned that there was no impact on their employment conditions. And only very, very small number of participants mentioned that their income increased. So what we want to talk about here is how migrants integrate into Japanese society. This is my long ongoing project, but what I was interested here is how the integration process was affected by the crisis. And recent ways of talking about integration in Japan is to discuss it as a two-way integration. It's in Japan it is represented in the multicultural community building program, where it is like the role of the integration institutions played by like local governments and local association for intercultural communication, international communication, and they actually organize and make the process. It's not only one-way integration where migrants are expected to assimilate in the society. It's more about teaching both sides about each other's presence and each other's culture, languages, and about their living in the same area. So that's the idea of two-way integration. So as you can see, before 2000s, the main trend was to follow this one-way integration, and then there was very short period of talking about two-way integration, and then let's say European Council started talking about three-way integration, where they are talking about sending countries and how they have to prepare migrants before they leave their country for integration and support their integration in the country. Like this is called three-way process of integration. I'm questioning this. That's why there is question mark, because like we actually were observing how it works in reality during crisis situations. And so the groups that are in charge of the integration on the different levels in terms of host countries, central government and local governments and cultural centers, sending country. Again, if we include it, it should be represented by embassies and consulates, or whether it should be represented by ethnic communities and some groups that actually work on consolidation of ethnic communities, and migrants themselves. So these are individuals and also ethnic NGOs and also Japanese NGOs who are working with foreign residents in Japan. So these are three participants. Oh, sorry, this was not supposed to look this way. Okay, well, since it looks this way, I'll quickly talk about main ideas. So the first case, like what happened in Japan. So now, like how the host country, Japan, treated, was acting in terms of foreign residents. So the first case of coronavirus was confirmed on January 16th. And by the end of March, by the beginning of March, flights from China and South Korea were tightening, so there's tightening of border control. And by April 3rd, most of the newly arriving foreigners and also long-term residents and permanent residents and foreign residents in general were refused landing in Japan, were denied entry. And so this lasted all the way till June. And in June, Japan implemented this humanitarian ground entry, and they started considering visa applications in July of 2020. What does it mean? So there is no changes in citizenship politics. While most of the G7 countries, so Japan was the only G7 country that did not allow permanent residents or long-term residents to come back to Japan, to return at the beginning of the pandemic, and so they could not travel abroad again from Japan as well, and they could not be visited by their family members. There was no any special treatment to essential workers, and actually what happened was that during March, a lot of Russian-speaking females were visiting for spring holidays, were visiting their home countries, and they could not return with their Japanese national children who are Japanese nationals. So they were stranded overseas till June, when there were a lot of actual movements to organize return flights. And also there were a lot of visa checks during lockdown. So it seems like Japanese Ministry of Justice took this chance to find out who is staying in Japan illegally. So on the other hand, what else was happening is that there was no lockdown, and inside Japan everybody were freely moving, And everybody were the target of subsidies for individuals and one-time payment of 100,000 yen, regardless of their status, whether they're foreign residents or nationals, Japanese citizens. So also a lot of businesses could receive emergency funding, and again, masks were distributed. Well, they're called ABU masks, and free vaccination. So this is these are other positive improvements. Online information on COVID was distributed by local governments and local news and ministries. One problem with that was that it was because even Japanese text is sometimes quite hard to understand, even though there were a lot of translations into many languages, and I think it was like all the way up to 16 languages, if I'm not mistaken. Some of the local governments actually found it difficult, that foreign residents found it difficult to understand information even in their own language. So one of the NGOs called Toyo Community Center in Hyogo Prefecture, they actually received funding from the prefecture from the Kobe city, I think, to translate information that is published in Japanese into easy language so people can understand what is going on. And many local governments switched their services to online and online Japanese language courses actually were continued functioning, and a lot of NGOs were working with telephone translation for hospitals. Food packages were delivered. One of the problems that came from all these services is that the question that local governments started asking is that whether there is actually a need to teach Japanese language, or whether there is a need to have in-person in medical interpretation. So, and these are the questions that are circulating now, because how COVID actually showed us different realities. And well, depending on the actor, some people say that yes, for some hospitals and for organizations, it's actually much easier to organize their services. But here, it's a question whether of culture and of the patients and their attitudes toward this online translation. But these are the effects of COVID on the local services. And so, what were sending countries doing? It's interesting, but I think a lot of countries, we know this, it was even difficult to sort out what's happening inside your own country, so to actually look outside, right? And so, but as far as I know, for those who were stranded overseas in airports, or who had to stay in the country while traveling, Russia initiated emergency daily payments. Again, there were issues with receiving those payments. Philippine consulate, they did not have much way to support people, but they were organizing outreach programs. They actually were visiting different areas of Japan with large number of Filipinos, and organizing consular services there. So, and that's how we were actually allowed and we were able to continue our next surveys. They're not represented here, but that's how they were doing it. And there was no really much movements from Russian consulate and other embassies of countries that I focus on. They were mostly online updates, and all countries moved to the online registration for their services. So these are sending countries. And what was interesting is that at this period of time, we saw the consolidation of ethnic NGOs and different groups. So what Filipinos were doing is organization of care packages, and they were collected through Filipino donors and local Japanese donors who were actually initiating this. And especially the largest groups that were hit the hardest by the pandemic were entertainers, single mothers, and and those whose businesses were not who were not really paying taxes and having businesses kind of out there and registered. And NGOs were again, a lot of people. It turned out that the help that was received from the Japanese government, you had to apply for it in Japanese language, and all the documentation was in Japanese, so they had to organize help. And there was another example with Minami Kodomo Kyoshu, it's in Osaka, so they were looking after children and their families. So we have to speed up. So in addition to sharing food and supplies, there were also entertainment organized online, and especially during COVID, churches were closed, and that's where Filipinos usually would visit on Sundays. So many of them turned to online masses that were organized by Filipino churches. And so some of the Filipinos started making bread and sweets to organize their businesses, and because of the Japanese language issue, there was raised in the interest toward learning Japanese language. As for Russian-speaking migrants, while there are a lot of as Filipinos tend to concentrate in different areas, and it is easier, due to their number, it's easier to find Filipino groups, and even if they're not communities, but support groups. For Russian-speaking migrants, Facebook became one of the sources of the receiving of information. And so different groups organized support, help to those travelers who were stranded in Tokyo airports. And then there was this general call for return flights for foreign family members with Japanese children, crowdfunding activities. I saw increase in online communication, increased information and news about Japanese society, and sharing COVID-related topics, and individuals started organizing weekly online gatherings and different cultural events. So online businesses, the same case as for Filipinos, proliferation of online businesses, home food, pastries, farm production, online language courses, even marriage mediation agencies started actually activating during COVID. And a lot of individuals actually contributed to the spread of information, so they were providing emergency contacts, COVID treatment and hospital experiences, governmental information, and travel and quarantine information. So, and I'll quickly move to the end of my presentation. So, what is happening currently? We cannot still say that it is three-way integration process. It's mostly two-way integration process with the active participation of ethnic communities. So what, recently there are also from 2019, there are different researchers who are talking about multi-way integration. So even though local governments are trying to catch up with two-way integration, we're already talking about multi-way integration, and they're happening simultaneously. And there is currently there is a lack of coordination between host society institutions, sending countries, and local governments on how to organize everybody and what actually what sort of problems people have. And so there is a lack of understanding of migrants' needs and realities. And COVID-19 showed that there is limitations in the support that could be provided by sending countries. That's why sending countries cannot really be really active in the process of integration. And so, yeah, we are talking about multi-way integration rather than three-way integration. And digital news and media became a big source of information for uh, migrants and actually for nurturing their sense of belonging. And we saw a spark of individuals and NGOs actually during the crisis. But the problem here is that I see that it is mostly driven by individuals, and like one individual person, charismatic person, would drive a lot of activities. And the question is how we can sustain these connections even after the crisis, because now when it is crisis, we have consolidation of this, but what will happen in the future, and whether these communities are actually sustainable in the long run. So I'll finish here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Viktoriya, for this fascinating presentation.